In the next couple of years, you're going to be hearing a lot more about driverless cars. Now, overseas, there's been a string of stories about deaths and injuries from driverless cars. And so we're looking now at a new legal framework. We're talking about new laws to cover driverless cars in Australia, hopefully by the year 2020. So what are those laws going to look like? That is all up for discussion at the moment to discuss exactly what the situation is currently and what it's going to look like in the future. We have Matthew Hopkins, the gaming and technology editor for Pedestrian, and Tegan Jones, the deputy editor of the technology website Gizmodo, and apparently at Wiggle. Tegan, before we get into what the likely laws are that are about to change, just what's the framework currently in terms of driverless laws?
At the present time, there are about 700 laws that are kind of in the way of autonomous driving.
700?
Yeah, there's a lot.
Is that all?
Just, a casual 700. So it was announced that transport ministers are basically getting together to be able to put some legislation in place to be able to roll out driverless cars and vehicles in Australia by 2020.
What are the main kind of aspects of the laws that currently exist that would have to change?
It's mainly around responsibility.
Yeah.
So, in the current state of things, let's say we put an autonomous car on the road right now, there's no one responsible for if it doesn't adhere to road rules or if there's an accident, like no one's held responsible.
Right.
So that's what they need to put in place, that there's always going to be somebody who's responsible for that vehicle in terms of road rules and accidents.
I guess from a governmental standpoint, in the US, the EU, what do the laws look like over there?
Everything's a little bit different, especially in the US, because they have such a state-by-state sort of setup over there. But what is interesting is that in California, Arizona, and Nevada, they actually have law in place where you don't actually necessarily need an actual human inside the car. It can just have a remote monitoring system for those vehicles. So that's a huge difference. I don't know if that's going to come over here, if they're going to start slowly and actually have a human in the car, but I found that super interesting.
Look, let's assume that the laws in the state of Silicon Valley won't be transplanted wholesale out to Australia. What would you like to see in those laws, Matthew?
I think something really clear cut. I mean, we saw with the last horrible incident with the Uber hitting the cyclist, that a lot of the companies, not just Uber. Well, I mean, Uber would stay pretty quiet about the whole thing for quite a while. But I mean,
Uber would just prefer that nobody noticed their brand name. They just keep using the service.
Yeah.
It was interesting to see all of the other tech companies jump in. The makers of the LiDAR and the makers of this and that were all jumping in. Well, no, it wasn't our tech that caused the thing because of X, Y, Z. All of that can be really confusing to someone that might not understand what's going on. Why is this other company jumping in? So I think making the laws really clear cut. And kind of putting the owner responsible for what the car does, I think would help for sure.
Liability is so important.
Yeah.
In terms of liability, how do you think it should operate, Tegan?
At the end of the day, especially when we get 5, 10, 15 years down the track, I really think it needs to be probably in the hands of the owner like it is now. Like if I hit someone on the road now while I'm driving, it's still my responsibility, even though I'm operating a vehicle that, might be manufactured by Volvo or whoever.
I think driverless technology is a hard sell. Like I think as a driver, I think it's a very hard sell. I don't know. I would want to get behind the wheel, and I don't know how comfortable I feel about being on the road with that kind of technology, even though the number of deaths from driverless technology you can count on two hands versus the number of people that die at the hands of, human drivers every hour is an astonishing one, right? So yes, there's a bit of, cognitive dissonance to engage with there, but I think in the marketplace, I still think it's a complicated offer.
Yeah.
These laws are likely to be in place by 2020, or at least that's the aim. I wonder how far you can shift the culture.
It's really interesting as well that you mentioned culture, because there was a study that came out by Ford, I think it was their trend predictions for 2018, early this year, where in Australia and most Western countries, almost like around 50% of Western drivers, especially in Australia, are really sus on autonomous vehicles still. So, there's that distrust, but also it comes down to identity. Until now, cars have been such a part of a person's identity, and an autonomous car really changes that. So I think that factors in as well.
Well, people are really scared about handing over control, I think being behind the wheel of a car, you're so used to being in control and controlling where that car's going, how fast it's going, what it's doing. Handing over that control is scary. If you get into a car with cruise control and then putting cruise control on and taking your foot off, it's even that's terrifying.
It also goes against so much of what they teach you when you first learn to drive a car, which is, you know, be constantly alert, be in control, think about the car as an extension of yourself in terms of your spatial awareness. All of that is very hard to turn off.
Yeah.
And so much of driving, if you've been driving for, you know, a couple of years, a lot of it is instinctive and muscle memory, and to kind of turn that off, I think, is a massive thing. 100%. I remember reading a bunch of research about the positioning of where you should sit people in a driverless car. So if it's a full driverless car where you never take control, right, there's no reason for you to be sitting in that configuration, everybody facing forward. You can face inwards, you can read a book, discuss life, whatever. And they did all this research, and they basically concluded that for the next little while, until the technology becomes ubiquitous, you need to keep people in that configuration, because people just are going to struggle to wrap their heads around the idea of moving in a direction that they're not facing, even though, you know, you do it on buses and trains.
I'd feel weird about just even getting in the back seat and facing forward. Like, definitely, especially if I was like alone in the car, that would feel so odd. It's like a Christine situation or something.
I would be slightly more comfortable if there was a robot sitting in the driver's seat.
Yeah.
Do you remember like was it Total Recall?
Yeah, I was just
with
gonna
the
bring it
Johnny
up.
Cab? If there was literally just an android in the front seat that I could visualize it, I honestly think I would be more comfortable with that.
I don't know, man. I've been playing Detroit Become Human, and I don't know.
All right. There is lots more of this in the podcast of Download This Show. We're also talking about the death of the music streaming. I want to sort of call it a website. It's Vivo. Apparently it's on its way out. Also, they're banning Facebook in Papua New Guinea. How the hell is that going to work? Find out in the podcast. Download This Show. We will see you there. Bye.